Boker Tov Talmidim. Uh, Having some technical difficulties here. We're on the eve of Pesach, and I'm here in a t-shirt, and I notice my beard is getting kind of patriarchal, so probably need to work on that too. But in any case, I'm here to talk to you about our Haftarah for this week, which is Shemini, the Torah portion of Shemini from the book of Leviticus, and our Haftarah portion will be coming from the second book of Samuel. So, Shemini is relatively easy to describe. It really has a narrative portion and a portion devoted to mitzvot. The narrative portion is about how the two sons of Aaron approach the altar of God, attempt to make an offering, and disaster strikes, and they are struck down by divine fire. Apparently, they did something wrong. So, our Haftarah portion, and the other half of Shemini is the laws of kashrut. Now, for our Haftarah portion, we shift gears a little bit. Hang on, I'm going to pause here. We were shifting gears. We shift gears. We've been, for a number of weeks now, hearing from the major prophets who speak oracles in their own voice. But now we're returning to a narrative portion of the prophets. And it's a little odd how things get divided up in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. There are certain books that could be described as royal chronicles, annals, histories that also get included in the prophets, and this is the case here. First and Second Samuel gives us our earliest view, probably the first work about King David and his reign. And so First and Second Samuel is mostly a narrative. It's almost exclusively third-person account of what happened. The voice of the narrator is an omnipotent narrator. And the passage that is chosen to go with Shemini is meant to go with the story of Nadav and Avihu and how they are struck down. To use the phrase that appears later in the book of Leviticus, because they drew too close to the Lord. Something they did brought them into the danger zone of relating to divinity, and they died as a consequence. The Haftarah portion has a parallel narrative. Something similar happens, and that is that David, after having established himself and stabilized his kingdom and his borders, decides that he is going to take the Ark of the Covenant out of its portable sanctuary where it has dwelled for the last several hundred years and transport it to Jerusalem, apparently with the ambition of building a permanent temple there. And he makes it a very ostentatious affair. According to the description in the Haftarah, 30,000 people form the retinue to escort the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. And David himself dances and maybe semi-naked. It's all very grand and startling. And in the interim, as all of this processional is going on, apparently the ark, which was sitting on an ox cart, started to slip. And one of David's trusted soldiers, Uzzah, acts quickly, apparently impulsively, and seizes the ark in order to stabilize it and secure it. But that was a mistake, and he is struck down. Now, this raises exactly the same issues that happened with Nadav and Abihu. Why? Why would God punish this man? Whatever Nadav and Avihu, whatever their alternative motives were, Uzzah was clearly trying to do the right thing, and he dies for it. And that just seems wrong to us. And it did to the sages, and it's been a puzzler for millennia to understand what was the force at work here. And there are no definitive answers to this. In some ways, we can do an interpretation that says the ancients viewed the power of God the way we think about fire or electricity. These are generally benevolent, beneficent forces in our lives, but if not properly handled, properly contained, they can prove to be devastating and destructive. And something akin to that is going on here, but that's not fully satisfactory to the modern mind. I'm going to suggest something else. It is assumed that Nadav and Avihu were engaged in something that was not totally appropriate, whether they were drunk, whether they were offering an alien practice in some form. They failed to follow the proper instructions for the tradition and the cult of Yud He Vav He. We don't know, but presumably they were doing something wrong. Maybe Uzzah gets caught up in the fact that David was doing something wrong. That what seemed to be this very pious act of bringing the ark to Jerusalem may have been an act of political appropriation, that David, having established his capital in Jerusalem, decides that he is going to make the cult of Adonai, the Mishkan, subservient to his royal purposes. And so the ark is transported to Jerusalem as a demonstration of political supremacy. And Uzzah, unfortunately, being a participant in this tainted act, ends up being a casualty. And indeed, what we see immediately follow this is that David abandons the ark at the property of a local magnate, someone who actually is not an Israelite, but the presence of the ark benefits him. And for 3 months, there's tremendous prosperity happening on the property of this individual. So David now sees that, in fact, the ark does bring blessing and not curse. And then he ends up finishing the journey. And then, and this is the interesting thing that concludes our Haftarah portion, is that David then announces he plans to build a temple to go with the ark. There's going to be a new central sanctuary adjacent to his palace. Again, he continues this effort at politically controlling the cult to his own benefit. And it is here we learn that while David is beloved of God and that David is to be honored and respected, God will not allow him to build a temple. That's going to be left to his son Solomon. God still seems to recognize that David is doing this not out of pure piety, but out of an attempt to solidify his political position. And so perhaps the best light I can put on this is that we need to be very cautious about political figures who try and wrap themselves in religion, who attempt to claim that they speak on behalf of God or faith or piety. It is possible, as the Torah itself says, one could hardly believe this if the words weren't there in the Torah itself. It's possible to draw too close to God. And maybe the meaning of that is that we attempt to use God for purposes other than God's purpose. It's weird that today is the anniversary of a year ago that a quote unquote rabbi in Saginaw here in Denton County, that is a messianic rabbi, was indicted on this day a year ago for sexually exploiting congregants. I think that's an example of how we can get too close to God and be misled by the very people who we presume have God's best interests in mind. David back then, this supposed rabbi now, uh, we have to approach our spirituality not just with enthusiasm, but also with a little seichel, a little wisdom, a little judgment, maybe even at moments a little skepticism, and come to understand and discern the difference between something that is done purely for the sake of the faith and something where the faith is being manipulated by someone who claims to represent higher spirituality in their decision making. So I'm going to leave it at that. I hope you all have a Chag Sameach, a wonderful Pesach, and I look forward to seeing you, if not at the Community Seder, this Shabbat.